The moment someone shows you who they are under pressure, believe it, Lily Carter whispered to herself as the sound of a glass hitting the table echoed sharper than the chatter around it. The restaurant was packed, every booth filled, every table buzzing with the low hum of Friday night conversations, the clinking of silverware, the warm amber lights reflecting off polished wood, but at table 12, everything had gone still. A man in an expensive suit leaned back in his chair, his expression tight with irritation, his voice cutting through the room just enough to draw attention without causing a scene. "I asked for this 10 minutes ago," he said, tapping his watch. Lily stood there, tray balanced steadily in one hand, her other hand resting lightly at her side, her posture calm, almost unshakable. Up close, the strain showed, the faint crease between her brows, the way her fingers tightened just slightly around the edge of the tray, but her voice, when she spoke, was even, respectful. "I understand the wait is frustrating, sir. Let me fix that for you right now." No defensiveness. No edge. Just quiet control. A few tables over, a man sat alone, dressed simply in a dark jacket, nothing about him drawing attention, except his eyes. Ethan Cole had been watching from the moment the tension started. He didn't look like someone who owned anything more than the seat he was in, but his gaze was sharp, observant, taking in every detail the way he always did. He had seen this scenario play out 100 different ways across his restaurants, raised voices, rushed apologies, nervous mistakes, but this was different. Lily didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She absorbed the moment, steadied it, and somehow, subtly, shifted its energy. "I'll have a fresh plate out in under 5 minutes, she added, offering a small, sincere smile, not forced, not rehearsed, just real. The man exhaled, his irritation softening just enough to lose its edge. "Fine," he muttered. "Thank you for your patience," Lily replied, as if he had given her something rather than taken it. She turned, moving quickly but without panic, weaving through the crowded floor with practiced ease. In the kitchen, the noise hit her like a wall, orders being called, pans clattering, heat pressing in, but she didn't stop. She reset the order, double-checked everything, her movements precise, efficient, controlled. Because she couldn't afford not to be. Not tonight. Not ever. Rent was already 3 days late. Her mom's medication sat half-paid at the pharmacy 2 blocks away. And this job, this uniform, this name tag pin just slightly crooked, was the only thing standing between her and everything falling apart. Back in the dining room, Ethan leaned back slightly, his fingers steepled under his chin. He had built an empire on numbers, systems, strategy, but none of that told him what he was seeing now. This wasn't training. This wasn't policy. This was something else. Something harder to find. Lily returned to table 12 exactly 4 minutes later, placing the fresh plate down with quiet precision. "Here you go, sir. I made sure everything is exactly as you requested." The man glanced at the dish, then at her, his posture easing. "Looks better," he admitted. "Thank you." Lily nodded once, not lingering, not expecting praise, just doing her job, and doing it well. As she walked away, Ethan's gaze followed her, something unreadable flickering beneath the surface. He had come in tonight expecting to observe operations, to confirm reports, to run another routine check on one of his many locations. But now, for the first time that evening, his focus had shifted completely. Because what he had just witnessed wasn't routine. It was rare. And whether she knew it or not, Lily Carter had just passed a test she didn't even know she was taking. By the time the dinner rush began to thin, the restaurant exhaled into a softer rhythm, conversations lowering, chairs scraping back in slow intervals, the tension of the night dissolving into something quieter, but Lily Carter did not slow down, not yet, because for her, the shift was not over until every table was cleared, every check was closed, every tip counted down to the last dollar and coin, and even then, there was no guarantee it would be enough. She moved from table to table with the same steady composure, her smile still present, though softer now, her energy carefully measured, like someone who had learned how to stretch herself just far enough without breaking, while across the room, Ethan Cole remained seated long after his plate had been cleared, his untouched glass of water catching the dim light as his attention never quite left her, because what he had seen earlier had not faded, it had settled deeper, turning into something more deliberate, more curious. The kind of curiosity that did not let go easily. He had spent years building systems to evaluate performance, metrics to define excellence, but none of those systems accounted for what Lily had shown under pressure, and that unsettled him in a way he did not expect. When Lily finally approached his table, not recognizing him as anything more than another late guest lingering too long, her voice carried that same calm warmth, though now edged with quiet fatigue. "Can I get you anything else tonight, sir?" she asked, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, posture still composed despite the long hours behind her, and Ethan looked up at her, really looked this time, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her name tag had loosened slightly, the subtle wear on her shoes that told a story numbers never could. "Coffee," he said after a brief pause, his tone neutral, almost casual. "Black," and Lily nodded once, coming right up, before turning away again, disappearing briefly into the service station, where she leaned her hands against the counter for just a second longer than necessary, her shoulders dropping as she exhaled quietly, a moment no one was supposed to see, a moment she quickly gathered back into herself before returning with the coffee, placing it in front of him with practiced precision. "Be careful, it is hot," she said, her voice steady again, and Ethan watched the transition, the way she carried her exhaustion without letting it define her, the way she chose composure even when no one would have blamed her for letting it slip, and that choice, more than anything, held his attention. "Long shift," he remarked, not as a question, but as an observation, and Lily allowed a small, honest smile. "They usually are," she replied, "but it is a good kind of busy," a statement that was only half true, but spoken with enough sincerity to sound real, because that was another thing she had learned, how to frame hardship in a way that kept it from overwhelming her. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, his gaze never fully leaving her. "You handled that situation earlier better than most people would," he said, letting the words land simply, without exaggeration, and for a brief second, Lily hesitated, as if unsure how to receive the comment, then she shrugged lightly. "People have bad days," she said, her tone thoughtful rather than defensive. "It is not always about me," and that answer, quiet as it was, shifted something in Ethan's expression, because it was not just composure he had witnessed, it was perspective, something far rarer. Across the room, a voice called out sharply, the manager signaling for Lily, his tone impatient even from a distance, and she straightened immediately, the softness in her expression replaced by focus. "I should get back," she said quickly, already stepping away. "Enjoy your coffee," and as she moved off, Ethan leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table, a habit he only had when he was thinking through something important, because what had started as a simple observation had now turned into something more intentional, something that resembled a decision forming beneath the surface, one that would not stay quiet for long. The manager's voice carried across the floor sharper this time, cutting through the calm that had settled after the rush, and Lily felt it before she even turned, that familiar tightening in her chest that came not from fear, but from knowing exactly what was coming next. She walked over quickly, wiping her hands on her apron, her posture straight, her expression neutral, ready, because in this job, readiness was not optional, it was survival. And standing near the register, her manager barely looked up from the screen as he spoke. "Table 12 says you delayed their order," his tone clipped, impatient, as if the conclusion had already been made, and Lily blinked once, steadying herself. "I corrected the order as quickly as possible," she replied calmly, choosing her words with care, but he shook his head slightly. "We do not correct, we prevent," he said, tapping the counter. "You should have handled it better," and for a brief second, something flickered behind her eyes, not anger, not frustration, but something quieter, something heavier, the weight of being blamed for something she had already fixed, something she had handled with more grace than most people would have, but she did not argue, she did not defend herself beyond what was necessary, because she had learned that sometimes, keeping your job meant absorbing what was unfair without letting it break you. Across the room, Ethan noticed the shift immediately, the way her shoulders held firm, the way her voice did not rise even when the situation invited it, and he watched closely now, no longer just observing, but studying, because this was the second layer of pressure, the kind that revealed more than the first. "I understand," Lily said finally, her tone still even. "I will be more careful," and the manager nodded once, dismissing her with a wave, already moving on to the next concern, while Lily turned away, her steps measured, controlled, as if nothing had happened. But the moment she reached the service station again, her hand paused against the counter, her fingers curling slightly as she exhaled through her nose, grounding herself before stepping back into motion. Ethan's gaze followed her again. Sharper now, because what he had just seen confirmed something he could not ignore. This was not performance, this was character, the kind that did not disappear when things became inconvenient or unfair, the kind that stayed consistent even when no one rewarded it, and that mattered more than anything he could measure on paper. A few minutes later, another server brushed past Lily a little too quickly, muttering under her breath about table assignments. A small tension that could have easily turned into something more, but Lily simply adjusted, picking up the extra tray without complaint, redistributing her workload without hesitation, as if she had quietly accepted that some nights demanded more than she should have to give, and still, she gave it. Ethan leaned forward slightly now, his interest no longer passive, because this was no longer a single moment of composure, it was a pattern, a sequence of choices that pointed to something deeper, something intentional, and for the first time that evening, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple card, turning it between his fingers as he considered his next move. Because he had not planned to intervene tonight, that was not the purpose of coming here, but plans had a way of shifting when something real appeared in front of him. Across the floor, Lily finished clearing another table, her movement slowing just a fraction as the night wore on, the exhaustion beginning to settle into her bones, but she kept going, because stopping was not an option, not with rent due, not with responsibilities waiting beyond these doors, and as she passed Ethan's table again, he looked up, his expression calm, composed, but behind it, a decision had already been made, one that would soon change the direction of both their nights in a way neither of them could fully see yet. The moment Ethan made his decision, it was not dramatic, not visible to anyone else in the room, just a quiet shift in posture, a subtle straightening of his shoulders as he set the untouched coffee aside and reached for the check, his mind already moving ahead, calculating not numbers this time, but people, patterns, and possibilities, because what he had seen in Lily Carter was not something he could walk away from without testing further. As Lily approached again to close out his table, her movements were slower now, the long shift finally catching up to her despite her effort to hide it. She offered the same polite smile, though softer, more tired. "I can take that whenever you are ready," she said, placing the check gently on the table, and Ethan glanced at it briefly before looking back at her, his expression neutral but his tone carrying a slight edge of intent. "Before I go," he said, pausing just enough to hold her attention, "I wanted to ask you something," and Lily hesitated for half a second, not out of fear, but out of caution, because questions from customers at the end of a shift could go in many directions, but she nodded anyway. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady, professional, and Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her reaction as he spoke. "How do you stay that calm when someone treats you like that?" he asked, referring to earlier without needing to explain, and for a moment, Lily did not answer immediately, her eyes shifting just slightly as if considering whether to give a real answer or a polite one, but something about his tone, the absence of judgment in it, made her choose honesty. "Because it is not really about me," she said quietly, her voice softer now, less guarded. "People bring their own stress with them, and sometimes it spills over. I just try not to carry it with me after," she added, offering a small shrug, as if it were a simple thing, even though it clearly was not, and Ethan watched her closely, recognizing the weight behind those words, the discipline it took to live that way. Because it was easier to react, easier to push back, but she chose restraint, and that choice said more than any resume ever could. "And when it does get to you," he pressed gently, not pushing too hard, but enough to see where the line was, and Lily exhaled lightly, a hint of a smile returning, though this one carried a trace of weariness. "Then I deal with it later," she admitted, after the shift, not during it, and there it was again, that quiet strength, that ability to compartmentalize, to protect her work even when her personal life demanded more than it should, and Ethan nodded slowly, as if filing that answer away, because it confirmed what he had already begun to suspect, that Lily Carter was not just capable, she was consistent, and consistency under pressure was rare. He reached into his wallet, placing cash inside the check folder, more than what the bill required, but not excessive, nothing that would draw attention, just enough to acknowledge without revealing anything. And as he handed it back to her, his fingers lingered for just a fraction of a second on the edge of the folder, a pause that signaled something unfinished. "You ever think about doing something else?" he asked, his tone casual on the surface, but deliberate underneath, and Lily blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question, her instinctive answer forming quickly, "This is what I do," she said, though there was a slight hesitation before the word settled, a hesitation Ethan did not miss. "For now," he added quietly, not correcting her, just expanding the possibility, and for a brief moment, something shifted in her expression. Something small but noticeable, like a door cracking open just enough to let a thought in, before she straightened again, grounding herself back in reality. "For now," she echoed, almost to herself, and as she stepped away to process the payment, Ethan watched her go, his decision now fully formed, because this was no longer about observation, it was about action, and whatever came next, it would not be by chance. By the time Lily returned to the table with the receipt, the chair was already empty, the faint warmth of where Ethan had been sitting the only proof he had ever been there at all, and for a brief moment, she paused, her eyes scanning the room instinctively, as if expecting to catch one last glimpse of him, but he was gone, just another customer passing through her night, or at least that was what it should have been, because something about that conversation lingered longer than it should have. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, like he had been looking past the surface of her answers, as if he had been measuring something she could not quite name. She shook the thought away quickly, slipping back into routine, finishing the last of her tables, stacking plates, wiping down surfaces, the steady rhythm of closing duties grounding her again in reality, because there was no space for distraction, not when every dollar mattered, not when every hour counted, and by the time the clock edged past 10:30, the restaurant had emptied out almost completely, leaving behind only the low hum of cleaning and the occasional clatter from the kitchen. In the back office, the manager called her name again, his tone less sharp this time but still carrying that same detached authority, and Lily stepped in. Her apron folded neatly in her hands now, her posture straight despite the fatigue settling into her bones. "Your numbers were off tonight," he said without looking up, flipping through the printed receipts, and Lily blinked, confusion crossing her face for just a second before she responded. "I double-checked everything before closing," she said carefully, but he shook his head, tapping a line on the page, "Table 12 adjustment, plus the delay complaint. It reflects poorly," he replied, his voice flat, procedural, as if this were simply a matter of policy rather than judgment, and Lily felt that same quiet weight settle in her chest again, the one she had carried earlier, only now it pressed a little heavier, because this time it came at the end of a long shift when her guard was lower. "I handled that situation," she said softly, not defensive, just factual, but he sighed, leaning back slightly. "Handling it is not enough if it creates a report," he said, "we need consistency." And the irony of that word almost caught in her throat, because consistency was exactly what she had given all night, what she gave every night, but she did not say that, she did not push, because she knew how easily things could shift from correction to consequence. "Understood," she replied instead, her voice steady even as her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her apron, and the manager nodded, already moving on. "We will monitor it," he added, dismissing her without another glance, and Lily stepped out of the office quietly, the door closing behind her with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. In the empty dining room, she moved slower now, gathering her things from the locker area, her worn bag slung over her shoulder, the strap frayed just enough to remind her how long she had been making things last, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself a moment, just a small one, leaning against the cool metal of the lockers as she exhaled deeply, her composure slipping just enough for the weight of the day to surface, not breaking, not falling apart, just acknowledging the exhaustion she had been holding back, because she had earned at least that much. Outside, the night air was cooler, a light breeze moving through the quiet street as she stepped out, the city no longer loud but not entirely still, and she adjusted her jacket, pulling it closer around her as she began the walk toward the bus stop, her mind already shifting to what came next, the bills, the responsibilities waiting for her beyond this shift, and yet, somewhere in the back of her thoughts, that question lingered again. Quiet but persistent. "For now," she repeated softly, under her breath, as if testing the weight of it, not fully believing it, but not entirely dismissing it either, because sometimes, the smallest cracks in certainty were where change began, even if she was not ready to admit it yet. And somewhere across the city, Ethan Cole stood by the window of his office, looking out over the lights below, his reflection faint against the glass, that same card now resting on his desk, no longer just an idea but the beginning of something deliberate, because he had not forgotten what he saw tonight, and he had no intention of letting it end there. The next morning arrived too quickly, the kind of morning that did not ask if you were ready, only demanded that you move, and Lily Carter woke before her alarm even had the chance to go off, her body already conditioned to the rhythm of early starts and long days, the faint grey light slipping through the thin curtains of her small apartment reminding her that rest had been short again, but not optional. She sat up slowly, pressing her palms against her eyes for a moment as if she could hold onto the last trace of quiet before reality rushed back in, and then she moved, because she always did, pulling on her uniform, smoothing out the creases with careful hands, pinning her name tag back into place with the same quiet precision as the night before, as if that small detail mattered more than it should, but to her, it did, because it was something she could control. Across the city, Ethan Cole was already in motion as well, but his morning looked nothing like hers, his office high. Above the streets, glass walls catching the early sunlight, a silent contrast to the narrow space Lily had just stepped out of, and yet his focus was not on the skyline, not on the meetings already lined up for the day, but on a single file open on his desk, one that had not been there before last night, one labeled simply with a name he now recognized clearly. He flipped through the pages slowly, reading not just the numbers, but the patterns, the attendance records, the performance notes, the small comments that most people would overlook, and what he saw only confirmed what he had already felt. Consistency, reliability, and something else that was not written anywhere, something he had only witnessed firsthand. Back at the restaurant, Lily stepped through the front doors again, the familiar scent of coffee and polished wood greeting her like it always did, grounding her in the routine she knew too well, and for a moment, everything felt the same tables, the same lighting, the same quiet tension that lived just beneath the surface of every shift. But as she tied her apron and stepped onto the floor, she noticed something slightly off, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, conversations among the staff a little quieter, glances exchanged a little more frequently, as if something had already started moving before she arrived. "You are on Section B today," the manager called out without looking up, his tone as flat as ever, and Lily nodded, stepping into her role without hesitation, because whatever had changed, her responsibilities had not, and she would meet them the same way she always did. The morning crowd was lighter, slower, giving her just enough space to think, though she tried not to, focusing instead on the rhythm of orders and refills. But that question from the night before lingered again, soft but persistent. "You ever think about doing something else?" And she found herself replaying it without meaning to, not because she had an answer, but because she had never really allowed herself to consider the question fully, not when survival had always come first. By mid-morning, the door opened again, and without realizing why, Lily glanced up instinctively, her eye scanning the entrance for just a second longer than necessary, but it was not him, just another customer stepping in, and she looked away quickly, almost annoyed at herself for expecting something that had no reason to happen, because people came and went all the time, and last night had been nothing more than that, or at least it should have been. Across town, Ethan closed the file slowly, his decision no longer just forming, but solid, deliberate, and he reached for his phone, dialing a number he did not call lightly. His tone calm but direct when the line connected. "I need you to prepare something," he said, his eyes steady as he looked out over the city again. "Today," and as the call ended, he picked up the card from his desk, turning it once more between his fingers before slipping it into his jacket, because whatever came next, it would not be accidental, it would be intentional, and somewhere, without knowing it yet, Lily Carter's routine day was already beginning to shift in a way she could not see coming. By late morning, the subtle tension Lily had sensed earlier began to take shape in ways she could not ignore. Small things at first, the manager moving through the floor more frequently than usual, his eyes sharper, his tone more controlled, and the other staff members adjusting their behavior in response, quieter, more precise, as if everyone had been placed under an invisible lens. Lily continued her work the same way she always did, greeting customers, taking orders, keeping her movements steady, her voice calm, but beneath that rhythm, she felt it building, the sense that something was about to shift, something just beyond her control. Around noon, the restaurant filled quickly, the lunch crowd arriving in waves, conversations rising, plates moving, the familiar pressure returning, and Lily stepped into it without hesitation, balancing trays, answering questions, handling small mistakes before they could grow into larger problems, her focus narrowing to the task in front of her. Because that was how she managed everything, one moment at a time. At table 6, a customer questioned a charge, his tone sharp but not aggressive, and Lily responded the same way she always did, explaining clearly, adjusting where needed, her composure intact. and though the situation resolved quickly, she noticed the manager watching from across the room, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, and for the first time, the weight of that observation felt heavier than usual, as if it was not just a routine check, but something more deliberate. Minutes later, she was called back again, this time in front of others. "We need to be faster on corrections," the manager said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby tables, not loud, but intentional, and Lily felt the shift immediately, the subtle embarrassment of being singled out in public, the quiet sting of being corrected for something she had already handled properly, but she did not react, not outwardly, she simply nodded, understood, her voice even, her posture unchanged, because that was who she had chosen to be, even when it cost her. Across the room, a few heads turned briefly before returning to their meals, the moment passing for everyone else, but not for Ethan Cole, who had just stepped inside moments earlier, his presence unnoticed at first as he paused near the entrance, taking in the scene with a clarity that came from knowing exactly what he was looking at, because this was no longer random, this was pressure being applied, publicly, deliberately, and he watched closely now, his expression still calm, but his attention sharpened. Lily moved back into her section, her pace steady, her breathing controlled, but inside, something shifted, not breaking, not collapsing, but tightening, like a thread being pulled just a little too far, and for the first time since the previous night, she felt the weight of it pressing through her composure, not enough to show, but enough to feel. At the service station, another server glanced at her briefly, then looked away, the unspoken message clear: no one wanted to be in that position, no one wanted that attention, and Lily understood that. She did not blame them, she simply continued, picking up her next order, adjusting her focus back to what she could control, because that was the only way forward. Ethan stepped further into the room now, choosing a table where he could see everything clearly. Not hiding, but not announcing himself either, his presence quiet but deliberate, and as he sat down, his gaze returned to Lily, tracking her movements, her reactions, the consistency of her choices even under increasing pressure, and what he saw confirmed what he had already believed. This was not coincidence, this was character. The manager passed by again, issuing another small correction, another public note, and Lily absorbed it the same way she had before, her voice steady, her response respectful, but the pattern was undeniable now, and Ethan's fingers tapped once against the table, that same controlled habit, because the line had been crossed, not dramatically, not loudly, but clearly, and he had seen enough. As Lily carried a tray toward the back, her steps slowing for just a fraction of a second as she passed the edge of the dining room, Ethan's eyes followed her, and in that brief moment, something shifted in his expression. Not curiosity this time, not even evaluation, but resolve, because whatever this test had been, it was over, and what came next would not be observation, it would be action. The shift in the room was almost imperceptible at first, like the air tightening before a storm, but for Ethan Cole, it was unmistakable, and as Lily Carter stepped back onto the floor from the service station, carrying another tray with the same steady hands despite everything that had been placed on her shoulders, he rose from his seat without urgency, without drawing attention, but with a clarity of purpose that changed the entire direction of the moment. The manager's voice cut across the room again just as Lily approached a table. "We need to talk about your performance," he said, this time not even lowering his tone, and a few nearby customers glanced up, sensing the tension even if they did not fully understand it, while Lily paused for a fraction of a second, her fingers tightening around the tray before she set it down carefully, her composure still intact, still chosen, even now. "I am doing my best to keep everything running smoothly," she replied, her voice calm, measured, respectful, but there was a quiet firmness in it now, not defiance, but truth, and the manager exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if the answer itself was insufficient. "This is not about effort, it is about results," he said, his words carrying just enough weight to make the moment heavier than it needed to be, and Lily felt it again, that familiar pressure, the kind that built slowly and then all at once, but she held her ground, not with confrontation, but with control, because that was who she was. Before the moment could escalate further, a new voice entered the space, calm, steady, and impossible to ignore. "Then let us talk about results," Ethan said, his tone even, but carrying a quiet authority that shifted the entire room without raising volume, and both Lily and the manager turned toward him at the same time, the interruption unexpected, the presence unfamiliar to most, but not to the system that governed the place they stood in. Ethan stepped forward, not hurried, not hesitant, his posture relaxed but deliberate, his gaze steady as it moved From Lily to the manager, taking in the full picture before settling. "I have been watching the floor for the past hour," he continued, his voice clear enough for the immediate area to hear, but controlled enough to remain professional. "And what I see is someone handling pressure with consistency, not creating problems," he added, his words precise, not emotional, not exaggerated, just accurate, and the manager's expression shifted slightly, confusion flickering across his face as he tried to place who this man was and why his opinion carried weight. "And you are," the manager began, his tone cautious now, but Ethan did not interrupt. He simply reached into his jacket and placed a card on the table between them, the motion simple, but the effect immediate. The manager's eyes dropped to the card, and for the first time since the conversation began, his confidence faltered, the recognition settling in faster than he could mask it, his posture adjusting instinctively. "Mr. Cole," he said, his tone changing completely, the sharp edge replaced with something more controlled, more careful, and around them, the subtle shift rippled outward, staff members glancing over, sensing that something significant had just happened even if they did not fully understand it. Lily stood still, her mind catching up to the moment, the name landing with a weight she had not expected, the realization unfolding piece by piece as she looked from the card to Ethan, the same man who had sat quietly at her table the night before, asking simple questions, watching, listening, and now standing here with a presence that carried far more than she had ever assumed. Ethan's gaze returned to her. Briefly, not overwhelming, not demanding, just steady, acknowledging her without putting her on display. Before he looked back at the manager, "If there is a performance issue," he said calmly, "it is not hers," and the silence that followed was not loud, but it was absolute, the kind that reshaped everything that came after, because in that moment, the balance had shifted completely, and for the first time since the pressure began, Lily Carter was no longer standing in it alone. The silence that followed did not need to be loud to be felt. It settled over the room in a way that made every movement slower, every glance more deliberate, and Lily Carter stood there for a moment longer than she expected, her mind still catching up to the reality in front of her, the name, the presence, the quiet authority that had just shifted everything she thought she understood about the man who had sat across from her the night before, asking simple questions as if he were just another customer. The manager cleared his throat, his posture adjusting quickly, his tone now measured with a caution that had not existed seconds earlier. "There may have been a misunderstanding," he said, choosing his words carefully, but Ethan Cole did not respond immediately. He simply held the moment long enough for the weight of it to settle, not to embarrass, not to escalate, but to make something clear, because clarity, when done right, did not require force. "Then let us correct it," Ethan said calmly, his voice steady, and he turned slightly toward Lily, not as someone stepping in to rescue, but as someone acknowledging what had already been proven. "You handled every situation I observed with consistency and professionalism," he said, his words direct, leaving no room for doubt, and for the first time, Lily felt something shift inside her, not relief exactly, but recognition, the kind that did not come often, the kind that saw beyond effort and into intention. The manager nodded quickly, agreeing now, the earlier tension dissolving into compliance. "Of course," he said, stepping back, and the conversation ended not with conflict, but with resolution, the kind that restored balance rather than creating more noise. Slowly, the room began to move again, conversations picking back up, plates being carried, the rhythm returning, but for Lily, nothing felt quite the same, because something had changed, not just around her, but within her, something small but undeniable, like a line she had been standing behind without realizing it had just shifted forward. Ethan glanced around once more, ensuring that everything had settled, before his attention returned to her, and this time, when he spoke, his tone was quieter, more personal, no longer meant for the room, but for her alone. "I meant what I asked you last night," he said, his eyes steady but not overwhelming. "You should think about what comes next," and Lily held his gaze for a moment, not intimidated, not overwhelmed, just present, because for the first time, that question did not feel distant, it felt real. Ethan reached into his jacket again, pulling out the same card, but this time, he did not place it on the table. He handed it directly to her, the gesture simple, intentional, and she took it carefully, her fingers brushing the edge as if it carried more weight than paper should, her eyes dropping briefly to read the name that now meant something entirely different than it had moments ago. "If you decide you want something different," he continued, his voice calm, "call that number," and there was no pressure in it, no expectation, just an open door. And that was what made it feel real. Lily nodded slowly, not rushing to respond, because she had learned that some moments deserved to settle before being answered. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steady, but softer now, carrying a depth that had not been there before, and Ethan gave a small nod in return, not lingering, not extending the moment beyond what it needed to be, because he understood that what mattered was not what happened here, but what she chose to do with it after. As he turned to leave, the room did not stop him, it simply made space, and Lily watched him go for just a second longer before looking back down at the card in her hand, her thumb tracing the edge unconsciously, the same way she had held onto her name tag every morning, but this felt different, not like something she had to hold onto, but something she could choose later. As the shift continued, her movements remained the same, her composure unchanged, but beneath it, something had shifted, a quiet awareness, a possibility she had not allowed herself to consider before. And when the afternoon light filtered through the windows, catching the edge of the card tucked carefully into her apron, she found herself thinking those words again, not as a question this time, but as something closer to a promise. "For now," she whispered under her breath, and for the first time, it did not feel like a limit, it felt like the beginning of something more.